Filmspotting is presented by Regal Unlimited, the all-you-can-watch movie subscription pass that pays for itself in just 2 visits. Sign up now in the Regal app or at the link in the show description and use code FILMSPOT25, that's FILMSPOT25, to receive your discount.
With a major selection of the looks your kiddos love starting at just $4 in the Walmart app, a new school year means a stylish new them. Who knew? Find skater skirts and Crocs that say, I'm casual but cool. Sparkly sneakers that say, it's my classroom, you're just learning in it. And preppy polos that say, I'm the teacher's pet, even if they're mommy's menace at home. Find their favorite styles starting at just $4 in the app. The Walmart you thought you knew is now new.
What kind of a show are you guys putting on here today?
You're not interested in art?
No.
Now look, we're going to do this thing. We're going to have a conversation.
From Chicago, this is Filmspotting, celebrating our 20th year. I'm Josh Larson.
And I'm Adam Kempenaar.
We spend our lives in search of the other half. If you think you found that, don't be so quick to let it go.
What a comforting thought. That's from the trailer for director Michael Shank's Together, with Alison Brie and Dave Franco as a couple whose relationship undergoes an unsettling transformation. We've got a review.
Speaking of unusual relationships, how about Joe Gillis and Norma Desmond? We'll talk Billy Wilder's Sunset Boulevard to mark its 75th anniversary. That and more.
All right, Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up.
Ahead on Filmspotting.
This episode is sponsored by Friskies, who would like to tell your cats hi. Now, if that didn't get your cat's attention, there is one thing that always does the trick. Just pour some Friskies crunchy food in the bowl and you'll hear those paws come running. Works every time. With so many Friskies choices, you can always bring your cats running from their secret napping spots. There's always more to explore. See for yourself at friskies.com or visit your local store.
Welcome to Filmspotting. Josh, if you count dating, certainly, we have both been with our wives for over 30 years, and still no fusing of the flesh. It seems the movies have lied to us yet again.
Well, speak for yourself, Adam. This eyeball on my shoulder, that's Debbie.
We do have a review of the new relationship body horror movie Together. We'll also get to our second Billy Wilder classic of the summer, Sunset Boulevard, which is 75 this year. Plus, I will have a few thoughts on AngelHeaded Hipster, the documentary about glam rocker Marc Bolan. And we will have a new Deeply Flawed Filmspotting Poll. Is there any other kind? We're asking you to relitigate the 1976 Best Picture race, the rare case where all 5 nominated films are legit masterpieces. But first, Together, a long-time but unmarried couple make a move to the country, which puts a strain on a relationship that has already entered a state of complacency. Things soon get weird, notably their bodies becoming one. Here's a scene that has them considering drastic measures to free themselves.
But imagine what you're about to do actually happening and tell me that's not gonna make things way worse.
Whiskey for the pain. And as soon as we're separated, I'll sprint for the first aid kit. We have bandages, disinfectant, everything we need.
Oh, you're right-handed. Oh, God.
Actually, maybe that's enough of that.
Why?
I think I can feel your whiskey.
You're right-handed and drunk. Remember when you said you weren't holding me hostage?
Do you think I want to do this?
No, so don't.
We are out of time. We need to do this while the drug system. We have to. If we don't split now, it'll be much harder later.
There's gotta be another way.
Body horror is an icky, tricky genre, Adam, and not for the faint of heart. In my book, Fear Not, I said that such films are often about what happens when the bathroom door is closed and locked. That's another way of saying they're extremely personal, and our reactions to them are personal as well. For my part, I'm unnerved but oddly transfixed by body horror. That's not to say I love the genre uncritically, just that when I hear about a new body horror film, I'm usually queasily intrigued. And the good ones make me both physically repelled and intellectually invigorated. But what makes a good body horror film? This isn't your favorite genre, Adam, but there are movies in this mode that you've appreciated. You were a fan of Coralie Fargeau's The Substance from last year, for instance. What makes a body horror movie work for you? What makes you glad you sat through the gruesomeness and gore? And to get to the point, did you find that in the new film Together? The movie stars James Franco and Alison Brie as a longtime couple at an awkward moment in their relationship. Things get more awkward when, while hiking, they drink from a suspect pond, and suddenly their bodies have the grotesque urge to merge. And that's not a euphemism. In fact, Franco's Tim has been avoiding physical intimacy for quite a while. So what did you make of Together, Adam, in general and as a work of body horror?
It's true. I'm a little squeamish. So to use your words, I'm more queasy than intrigued, I suppose, when I hear about a new body horror film coming out. But what does Dan Levy say in Schitt's Creek? I like the wine, not the label. It will always be about the movie, not the genre or whatever type of movie it is for me. I can tolerate all sorts of unpleasantness if it has a purpose and it pays off. And certainly if it does in the end pay off, that's in the filmmaking, the storytelling overall. So there will always be body horror films I like and some I don't. I'll tell you a little story though, Josh, about my experience watching Together. It was Monday. It was late afternoon. I had the entire theater to myself. And you know those scary or uncomfortable scenes that we involuntarily react to by covering our eyes or maybe watch with our eyes peeking through fingers? I don't know if you do that. I do that. It's not just a cliche. I do that. Well, I didn't have to maintain any public decorum. I could just act like I was in my living room. When I got scared or uncomfortable, I could basically fling myself forward and cover my entire face with my hands. There was one jump scare early on. I think you'll know which one I'm referring to here in a moment, during a nightmare that Tim is having that got me so bad. It's a face with yellow eyes, and longtime listeners will know the yellow eyes in movies and horror movies always get me. It so unnerved me that even though I knew I was alone, I swear to you that I looked over both my shoulders just to make sure that nobody saw me freak out for a second. I was so embarrassed by how I reacted. But there was only one scene that really flung me forward, that for the entire runtime of that scene, I couldn't watch, or I couldn't watch without looking through my fingers. And I'll give you a hint. It didn't involve any blood or stuck body parts. It's the end of the party scene where we meet our main characters, Tim and Millie. And I'm not going to spoil it for those who haven't seen it yet. I'll just let you go into it and navigate your own discomfort. It turns out I'm more averse to people unintentionally humiliating themselves than I am body horror, especially well-intentioned people humiliating themselves. But that's all a roundabout way of saying or trying to illustrate that although I might be as conflicted about my relationship to this movie as Tim is about his relationship to Millie, it's quite subdued as body horror. Even when the knives come out, even when it gets a little bloody, the gore really is left to the imagination. And while that might disappoint fans of the genre expecting more blood and guts and conventional thrills, I'm, of course, in the other camp. And instead of overindulging in the potential gross out elements, I do think this movie sincerely wants to reckon with the conundrum that a lot of couples that have been together a while face. Do we want each other? Do we love each other? Or have we just gotten used to each other? Are we together out of convenience and to some degree comfort? Have we developed a kind of codependency? And as horror often does, Together takes a very real universal anxiety and amplifies it to its most absurd degree. Codependency? Well, what happens if we remove the co? And, Millie, you think you're sure? Emphasis on think, because the cracks are clearly there right from the beginning and she's aware of them. You think you're sure you want to spend the rest of your life with Tim? You can't wait to be secluded with him out in the countryside? You just wish that he was tethered to you as emotionally and physically as you seem to be to him? Guess what? Your wish is granted. Tim, you're not sure you want to spend the rest of your life with Millie. You're seeking clarity. You need something that will give you that certainty, give you that direction. Guess what? Your wish is granted. That's the premise. That's the concept this movie is playing with. And on that level, we'll get into the reasons why I'm conflicted about my response. But on that level, that's that's how Together worked for me.
And I think it would have worked for me similarly if it had been more than a premise, but I didn't find a progression beyond that in Together, which is why I probably began as mixed, but ended up negative on this film. You said it, Adam. It has a purpose and it pays off. I think the movie has that clear, potent allegory at the start. This anxiety, a specific anxiety it sets out to explore or wants you to think it's going to explore. I wish it had done the work to excavate that throughout. And for me, a lot of it had to do with beyond that scene you mentioned, which I won't spoil either, before this couple moves to the countryside. We don't get much about their relationship, or I didn't get a sense of who they were together or even apart. They were probably thinly but effectively sketched at the start. You get the broad outlines, as you described, of Tim being quite not as committed and Millie perhaps being overcommitted for the situation. And beyond that, I felt the film got out in the countryside and became more interested in setting up these set pieces of gore. You're right. There isn't out and out gore. It's not necessarily what the movie wants to spend all its time on, but it wants to spend significant sections on. And we know we're going to get it. And I felt a disconnect between the relationship. Perhaps it's the performances for me. I found both of these performances to be pretty flat. In the case of Brie, I'm not all that familiar with her. I mostly know her from Mad Men, where, she had a bit of a schoolmarm quality, and that's doubled down on here. Her telling Tim when he should shower, or that he's using too much data on their phone plan, these sorts of things. Again, that's more of a repeating of what we've learned at the start. And Tim, this idea that he's a little unsure about the relationship, it almost reverses after this curse falls upon them, where the relational allegory for me gets confused, because then he becomes, I don't think this is a spoiler, but he becomes the needy one. And she starts to become the somewhat distant one. Again,
isn't that a progression?
It's, to me, it's more of a flipping that doesn't make sense, because I don't really demand a lot of logic for my horror films, but I did find myself wondering, why is Millie not similarly affected? If this fundamental curse, which has biological rooting, it's related to, this pond water, like, why suddenly is she not as compelled to be close to him? There's just little things like the first set piece we get, which I think counts as body horror because he's injuring himself. Tim is in the shower and Millie is driving away, and he's suddenly violently thrown about by the turns in her car. I didn't quite understand the dynamics there. And again, these are minor things, but it was difficult to feel the movie was really rooted in this exploring of the idea of it as a central relationship. As it went on, I thought maybe there were other interesting things that could have been examined. I mentioned the physical intimacy, Tim's lack of physical intimacy with Millie. Does the curse represent a fear of sex? There's a very simple idea. If the movie had committed to and spent more time on, that might have worked. You mentioned that dream sequence, which I agree is very effective. The jump scare there, that's related to a story we learn about Tim's trauma and his mother's mental illness. Might there be a connection to the curse there? Maybe, kind of. We get a cult subplot here too. Yeah. There is a lot that, for me, hinted at other movies Together could have been. And really, I'm not demanding much from a horror movie like this. I want exactly what you said at the top, a potent allegory. I want a specific anxiety it's going to be explored. I just want one idea, and it to really give service to that. And for me, Together was a little bit more going for the gore scenes, the body horror scenes, eventually really going off the deep end in that direction, speaking of the substance, but not doing any of the work that I like to see put in beforehand.
I think it did more of the work than you're giving it credit for. We'll get into some of the ways it may go off the deep end here in a bit, but I saw the characters, the performances, and just the the screenwriting and the storytelling around those characters is having more depth than I think that you're giving him credit for. Even with Millie, I never saw her as that kind of authoritative, or I suppose kind of mom-like figure that's scolding the character, and we can talk about a couple lines that you mentioned in particular. But even though she's the one who, as I said, is more tethered in some ways to him, and he has the more clear doubts, she is also someone who from the very beginning we see is spiraling a little bit about their relationship. And I think the whole premise there as well is tied to the fact that it's like the struggling married couple who, and we hear so many of these stories, right, who decide that we're really struggling, so what are we going to do to save this marriage? We're going to have a baby. They think that somehow they're going to solve their problem and become closer as a couple by moving out to the middle of nowhere and only having each other. This is a bit of a last-ditch effort, and I see in the performance and I see in the writing that Brie's character knows that. So I don't see them quite as one-dimensional, I think, as maybe that you do. And I really felt like I understood who they were as individuals and as a couple from that opening scene. I'm so glad they just kind of threw us into it based on the way they talked about each other. The way in Millie's case, she's always having to defend Tim to her best friend. And in Tim's case, the way he's really not talking about her much at all. He's just talking about himself and his failed music career. That told me enough about who they really are as people and how they maybe feel about each other. And the way even that they interact with each other, Josh, at the party from across the room. And then when they're together, the smiles, the gestures, this may be where some of the Brie Franco extra textual stuff comes into play and really serves the story, where I got the sense that they know each other really well. There's a built-in familiarity with the way that these two characters interact with each other. And I got that sense that, yes, they know each other. There's an intimacy where you not only understand that they love this about each other, that they know each other so well, but it also could be taking its toll on each other. So I'm really grateful that we didn't get any more fleshing out, if you will, to these characters. I think it did what good narratives do, thrust us right in.
Yeah, I agree. The opening section does good work in the ways you're describing. I guess I just wanted more of that. It's kind of like the movie felt, okay, we did that. Now we don't have to do any more of it. And it's so funny you mentioned, the fact that Brie and Franco are an off-screen couple, because for me, it's a case of that working against them. And I didn't know this until after I'd seen the film and had written up a review about it and then saw it on social media somewhere. And it can go both ways, right? Sometimes off-screen couples bring that chemistry that you found. And it's absolutely why their performances work together. In this case, for me, it was the other way. Once they got out to the countryside, I felt like, in fact, some of their scenes together were awkward when they're discussing, what would your last social media post be if you died? That there was, in my experience, I felt I would have guessed that these two performers were deeply uncomfortable with each other off screen.
I felt it was the opposite.
Yeah,
that only
it's
had
one
that
of
kind
these
of
weird
caustic,
things.
Cynical sense of humor that only people who know each other's sense of humor really well would understand that scene.
A little forced to me.
You talked about it's here again. I think maybe you're seeing Brie through a prism that I don't see her through. And I haven't seen Mad Men, so I definitely don't see her through that lens. But those lines you mentioned, I remember them very vividly because there are certain line readings that I remember pretty vividly in this film, like when she says to him that maybe he should take a shower, and the fact that they are running out of data. And I just think there's more to it. It isn't a case where it's just about her being someone who's chiding him, who has to be telling him what to do. That moment with the shower is one where it's just followed him. She's gotten out of the shower and he's rubbing her back, and he actually really hurts her. It's a really weird physical exchange, and he wants to go with her or asks if he can go with her. And she really clearly wants some distance from him. Mm-hmm. And the way she says, like, take a shower is kind of like if you were saying to someone like, no, you can clean the garage. Like you've got other things to do. It's not so much like take a shower, you smell bad. That's how I interpret it. And even the data, Josh, the data is another example of them. I think it's adding to the character because it's in their relationship, because it's another example of him just casually without thinking. She's not saying, don't do that. How dare you? She's just pointing out, we only have so much and it's about gone. And what's he doing yet again? He's just not thinking about it and he's using it. Right?
I think it's the yet again for me, though.
It's buildup of microaggressions that take their toll. Right?
For me, it's the yet again of it. Is like, I knew that about them. I knew, like, she's in this slot, he's in this slot. And then, yes, the curse seems to reverse that a little bit, which you think would be interesting, except for the illogical nature of it. And that's where I got hung up a little bit as well. And maybe as far as Brie is concerned, it's just, a Brie thing for me. I know people really appreciate her as an actress. And again, I haven't seen all that much, and it's not fair to just bring Mad Men into this if that's all I've seen, but it is a quality where, I don't know, there's just like a low energy, lack of engagement in the performance that seems at odds a little bit with the premise and at odds with what Franco is trying to do too. I wanted to ask you this, and I don't know how this played in your lone viewing in the theater, but at what point did you find this purposely funny, unsure whether it wanted to be funny or not funny? You shouldn't be laughing, but you were. And it relates to Franco because the level of shouting he's frequently doing here, to me, feels a little bit like Sweaty trying to make something funny. And it works in one scene. The clip I believe we heard where they're contemplating with this sawzall actually having to cut their own flesh. This isn't spoiling anything, I don't think. And he notices you're right-handed. And I think she's got it. She has to have it in the other hand. And that to me felt like, okay, that's a good line. He delivers it with like exasperation. It's the ridiculousness of this situation. And we can laugh in terms of release. There are a couple other moments though, one involving her hair, which struck me as unintentionally funny. I wasn't sure how to gauge his performance. And I will say too, I think some of the effects, the special effects, although they're practical and I always appreciate that, were a bit dodgy to me. And that fell into this same bucket of, should I be laughing at this? Am I meant to be laughing at this? Is it because of how it looks and it shouldn't look that way? But anyways, in general, where did you land on, Together as a comedy?
I didn't have any issues with unintentional humor, and I didn't have any issues with bad special effects until one moment near the end of the film. And without getting into spoilers, and I promise we won't, I will mention something else about that scene so you'll know what I'm referring to, at least there, Josh. And I think other listeners who have seen the film will know what I'm referencing. And I even have a hard time, honestly, talking about Franco's performance and separating it from Brie. I just see them as such a pair in this film, and I like the performance. I feel like it's a unified performance in this movie. But as far as the comedy, nowhere in this marketing of this film have I seen it tagged or referenced as a comedy, and that makes total sense. But I do think it has a lot of humor to it. And I even used the word absurd earlier. I think Shanks and company get the inherent humor in some of these scenarios, as you said. Even a bathroom quickie that results in getting stuck together, that's funny. You mentioned it. I never thought I'd say this about a scene involving a sawzall and human flesh, but it's neither played for humor or horror, yet it's both awkwardly funny and distressing. And when I say played, Josh, what I mean is I don't feel like, and I watched that scene again, we played it coming in, right? I don't feel like it's either ramped up for comedy's sake or ramped up for terror and gore sake. They're just letting the natural tension of the scene and the suspense of, are they really going to do this? Are they really going to cut their flesh? And the dynamics of their relationship, like how they naturally talk as a couple, the way they banter with each other, what they know about each other's idiosyncrasies and their failings as people, that's all coming to bear in that scene. So without ramping it up, it is funny. And if I was in a theater with other people, maybe we would have been laughing. I was laughing, and yet I was also terrified watching it. So I think that's a really effective scene. I think it translates to other set pieces too.
Let me just say quickly, that is the highlight for me. I think that scene works perfectly in terms of balancing tone, even performance. I'll give you, as I said, Franco's line delivery and the pacing and the editing there too. The way that scene comes to a conclusion is just chef's kiss. So and I wish the movie had more of that, but I do agree that's a great scene.
Another good one, though, for me is when they are not too long after that, very intentionally sleeping in separate rooms. And this force sends them flying towards each other. And Franco's being dragged across the floor. I really like the filmmaking here, and I'll give you one specific instance why. He's being dragged across the floor in what I have to assume is a very clear homage to The Exorcist. Brie is doing a spider walk, essentially, not downstairs, but out the door towards him. And it does also seem like the way they're being led, the way their bodies are being led, it's as if certain pieces are meant to fit together intentionally like puzzle pieces that they're trying to fight against. And what I like in particular, Josh, is the use of sound here. And I think there are some other nice filmmaking touches throughout that show that Shanks knows what he's doing with the camera. But the sound, the way that sequence starts, they go to bed and close the door. And then what happens next? It's darkness and we hear sound. We hear the sound of him being dragged. And that cues us in that, oh no, something terrible is happening, but we don't know what. And so we're anticipating the lights being turned on, so to speak, figuring out what's actually happening. But it also makes sense because he doesn't know. He hasn't woken up yet. His eyes haven't opened yet, right? He's just being dragged across the floor. So we're in the same situation as viewers that he's in, where he has to open his eyes. He's just waking up to the sound of him being dragged in the dark. So I really do like that. I will say, though, Josh, all of that established. The humor surprised me and surprised me in a good way. I'm not sure that when you add in all of the other elements, and I do want to talk about some of these more, when you add in all those other elements that are introduced into the plot, I'm not sure that they find the right balance.
It's a little bit of too much for me, and I don't want to explain exactly what I hinted at this cult subplot, and let's just say that it does take on more prominence as the movie goes on. It also, to me, it goes back to my simplicity idea. It strikes me as wholly unnecessary. This movie, if it had devoted the time it gives to the cult elements, for me, to the relationship dynamics, just given all that screen time and moved over and given us more scenes of them as a couple, even more scenes just being there in the countryside before they drink the water. That would have enabled the movie to be more focused and richer and deeper. So I think that was, and the other issue I had with the cult element is just some of the logic that goes into it as well. Again, not being nitty gritty about horror movies. I give them a lot of leeway. I think one that we split on was It Follows, and you had many logical concerns, some of which were valid. I agree.
One big overarching one.
And I agree it's a valid question, but for me, that movie engrossed me to the point where I was like, okay, but whatever. Here, it became increasingly hard to say, whatever.
I agree with you. And so much so, Josh, that maybe I'm being too apologetic. Though I'm not willing to quite go this far, I at least want to throw it out there. There's a part of me, I have this in my notes. The more I thought about it, I wondered, it's so underdeveloped, in fact. The logic is so faulty in some ways and so flimsy that I actually wonder if that's part of the joke that they want us to pick up on. And if it is it too clever for its own good, where there's no mystery to it? If you think about it, a lot of other films would have actually built up to the reveal. And there is a bit of a reveal, don't get me wrong, but this has a prologue. We know ahead of what the characters do exactly what's happening.
Yes.
And we're not idiots, so that when we see certain symbols and everything, and we see what's in that cave, we kind of know, just based on other movies that we've seen, what has to be happening. And then we hear a conversation that occurs and we're like, okay, we know what's going on. It almost feels to me like they want us to have a meta experience where we're ahead of the characters. We know based on other films that we've seen, other horror films, that the joke is actually, no, nothing's a mystery. It's exactly what it appears to be. And we're not even going to build it out.
It's possible. I don't think the payoff, if that was the intent, is worth it. And also I did sense, a desire without this cult element, you wouldn't get the ending we get, which I'll say doesn't go substance big, but feels in that vein, feels like it's trying to swing that big. I think of other recent horror movies like Malignant, or a horror movie like Barbarian. We're going to be discussing the director's follow-up film, Weapons, next week. And Barbarian similarly builds to this gonzo, gorzo climax. And in some ways, it feels like together, at some point, the filmmakers wanted to head that direction as well. And just having a movie about this couple might not have enabled that possibility in the way they wanted to, but you add in these elements that the cult brings in, and maybe we can get there. Again, I don't know. Maybe it was a more holistic process as a viewer. That is what it feels like. And it's still, that's fine if you want to go there. But even something like The Substance, which I liked better, had some reservations about. At least it had complete focus and commitment on what it wanted to be about, right? The horrors of aging as a woman in Hollywood. And it took that as far as it could go. And it was insane how far it took it. But it did the work before it got there, was my feeling on it. And together, the work is the homework is a little messy and all over the place.
So I want to pinpoint a couple things in particular when we talk about maybe the world building or some of these other elements. And for me, it might be a downside or a byproduct of actually devoting as much time as they do, and it's a positive, to Tim and Millie and their relationship. I know you see it differently, but that world building then doesn't feel quite as robust. There is that prologue I mentioned. Again, I'm dancing around all the details. I promise I'm not going to spoil anything, but there's the prologue, there's a cave, there's a missing couple I don't think we've mentioned. There's a pair of dogs. This all connects to a cult. They all factor into the story in major and in some minor ways. And when I do try to envision a version of Together that leans into these elements even more, I don't necessarily see a better movie. I see one weighed down by a lot of plot. Mm-hmm. But the version we get also does feel, as we've discussed, too flimsy. And there's a reveal. Here's a minor one, or actually a bigger one for me. I'll get to the minor one. There's a reveal near the end involving the missing couple that only opens up more questions than answers. And not the good kind of questions. No. The wait, what variety of questions? The questions where you start worrying about the strength of the foundation the story is built on, rather than opening up new ideas to consider. Did not get that at all. That's also the same moment I was referring to earlier when I talked about the effects being perhaps questionable. Here's the minor one. The only direct reference to the dogs from the prologue, which, by the way, felt to me like an overt homage to The Thing, John Carpenter. The only direct reference to the dogs from the prologue happens about midway through, when things are really kind of starting to get truly weird for Tim and Millie. She's a teacher, and one of her young students, this young girl, leaves a troubling drawing on her desk for Millie to see. And it opens the door for us to consider something very traumatic involving a character who is otherwise a complete non-factor that the movie is using just to add a little bit of ominousness. And it's not ominous. It doesn't serve any purpose. And here again, it's a minor issue. It's a nitpick perhaps, but it does connect to a larger one for me that I wanted to open up and see what you thought of it.
Okay.
And I kind of already know what you think of it, because I know that you think overall the movie just has too much going on, and this falls into that. Tim's trauma, what he is dealing with, coming into the issues that they start dealing with in the story proper, the recent loss that he has suffered, and the grief he is still wrestling with. He's lost his parents, we learn. And this is information given early on in the movie. This isn't uncommon in horror movies to have a character who has recently experienced a loss or gone through something painfully traumatic. Parental loss, I think about Midsommar right away. And it can be very effective. It can be powerful. Sometimes the horror they're facing is a manifestation or can be read as a manifestation of these feelings and this trauma in some way. From a relationship standpoint, too, this grief adds to Tim's rudderlessness. I think it's impacting his sexual desire. Once we get some insight, we get more insight into the exact nature of what he saw, what he experienced. It becomes clearer. And I think it's even articulated at one point in the screenplay why he would legitimately fear, not just be skeptical of or be hesitant about entering into marriage or long-term commitment, but really fear the idea of being bound to someone forever. And sex is going to be seen as part of the gateway to that commitment. Still, Josh, the scene he describes is grisly. And I wonder if it doesn't undercut the movie and my defense of it in some way, the way the filmmakers have stacked the deck. And this concept is introduced that the movie is definitely having some fun with. Plato talks about it in the Symposium. Aristophanes raises this whole notion that we all were originally creatures that had 4 arms and 4 legs, and Zeus thought we were too powerful and he split us, and we're all really searching for our soulmates. That's the other main conceit of this film, really. Soulmates isn't just a concept that comes from romantic comedies. What if it's real? That's what this movie is basically. That's the question it's posing. And that, of course, ties to the central anxiety about commitment as well, and the idea of it being real and universal. Those are not only enough to build the movie around, but arguably that's kind of the entire point. We all face loss, sure, but most of us hopefully never go through or never confront anything as horrific as he does, which doesn't make Tim then representative of all of us. It actually dilutes the power of the universality of the concept of the film in some way by adding this element of the really horrific trauma that he's faced.
So I'm going to go the other way and say that is the one sub-thread that I do think the movie that is connected to the movie's main concern, which is relational anxiety. As you described, I think you described it well. And if the movie had spent more time connecting those two, forgetting about the cult, it nods, I'll just say it nods to like non-binary implications here and there, which are also potentially very interesting. But if you're not going to really explore them, just don't bother with that. But if it had just kept with that subplot, which is Tim's trauma, I think you're right. It's very directly related. The grisly element, and again, I'm dancing around spoilers. The grisly detail we discover is a direct parallel for his greatest fear relationally and the actual physical reality of what begins happening to them. So I think there's a great horror movie there, but the family trauma is sort of dropped about halfway through. After we get that reveal, I don't know if it's even referenced again, and it doesn't have to be talked about. I don't even think the filmmaking returns to it again. I don't know if we get another flashback or a dream sequence. Again, maybe those aren't the right choices to make. Those are kind of cliches, but some way visually, maybe even the eyes that you mentioned, Adam, somehow bring that back so that we're connecting Tim's trauma with what we're now seeing in the latter half of the film. And that's where I do feel I'm usually one who defends horror trauma. I know a lot of people these days roll their eyes as soon as there's a story that, oh, it's a horror movie, but it's really about grief. Oh, it's a horror movie, but it's really, about this terrible thing that happened. I think those are instrumental ways to make a horror movie. The problem is if you just drop it in as a device, right? With any sort of filmmaking device. If you're just going to say, well, I'm going to kickstart my movie and try to give it more importance by referencing this, and then going to kind of forget about it. Yes, that's cheap. It does happen occasionally, maybe more so recently than it did before. But I still think there are good horror movies being made today that take the trauma seriously. It's a through line through the character's experience. And that makes them richer for me. I see what you're saying about the particular experience that Tim had, not being universal, thank goodness. But I think that doesn't bother me as much because it does kind of take it into this really disturbing realm that horror sometimes can push things. I'm okay with that. Again, for me, it's just pare away some of these other potential avenues that you kind of tiptoe on and instead focus on Tim's past, how the body horror reflects that, and how it reflects the current relationship. I think they could have had a really strong horror film there.
And for me, it's more something I'm still considering. I'm not really sure where I land on that question, but it's not so much a matter of me wanting the filmmakers to invoke that trauma more consistently or again throughout the film. I always felt like I understood, Josh, that it was underpinning his behavior and Tim's actions. It might come back to that balance question. And even what you said about there being a really compelling horror film in there, the one you wanted to see, I think you're right. Even though I like some elements of the humor, there's something about that antithetical nature of the absurdity and the cult elements and the flimsiness of some of the areas this film goes against the real terror of that trauma that's introduced. And you know what? If the movie had actually gone, even to go back to your setup question, if the movie had really leaned into that even more, that might be a film, ironically, I'd enjoy even more, even though it might actually be a tougher sit.
Yeah, tougher watch. Yep, probably.
You know? Together is out now in wide release. If you see it and agree or disagree with our thoughts or have any other comments you'd like to share, we'd love to hear from you. Feedback at filmspotting.net.
Whiskey for the pain.
Listening is the number one thing you can do to support an independently produced show like ours. There are a couple of other things you could do. You could take a minute to give us a rating or a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Doesn't matter if you're brand new or have been around for 20 years. Every new review helps us reach new listeners. Another way to support us, join the Filmspotting family at filmspottingfamily.com. Thank you very much to Family Plus member Jake Thurman in Indianapolis. If you want to follow Jake on Letterboxd, his handle is Mr_Thurman.
And as we're going to hear in a moment, he really does need to be called Mr. Thurman. Josh, Jake says, I found Filmspotting in 2012 and I was devouring podcasts while remodeling a house in my summer off from teaching, and I was instantly hooked. I'm shamefully just now signing up for the family. I added film history and film criticism to my course load as a high school teacher in 2015, and I have used Filmspotting as a resource many times, so I guess I also kept listening to be better at my job.
I mean, Jake, it sounds like you should be getting your school to pay for your Filmspotting family membership.
Good point.
If you're putting it to use at work, I mean, come on.
Yeah. Professional development. I'm sure their
There
budget,
you go. There you go.
I'm sure their budget is about as big as mine is right now. We need to compare our syllabi for film criticism. A favorite review or segment. I really enjoy the anniversary reviews of older films and The Sacred Cows. The longer end of year review episodes are also something I always look forward to every winter. A review we got wrong. The original Roadhouse is a masterpiece, and Josh has rarely been more wrong.
A masterpiece,
yes.
Jake. Okay.
Yes.
Well,
Preach,
that's fine.
Mr. Thurman.
Hey, I can take it if I learned. What did I learn from Roadhouse? Pain doesn't hurt. Pain don't hurt. Pain don't hurt.
Pain don't hurt.
Bring it on, Jake.
A Letterboxd top 4 for Mr. Thurman. Cool Hand Luke, Do the Right Thing, Heat, and E.T. You can't argue with that.
That looks good.
Favorite movie he revisited recently, Hot Fuzz, and It's Still Perfect. A random film or filmmaker he loves, David Lowery, and both A Ghost Story and Green Knight. A movie Jake credits with becoming a cinephile. I fell in love with watching movies with E.T., Indiana Jones, and Marty McFly as a kid in the 80s. Seeing Pulp Fiction probably way too early at 13 was the first time I realized that I loved thinking and talking about movies also as much as watching them. And finally, a book about movies or movie making. This is about as impossible as the Letterboxd 4 favorites, but I would say that I recently read and really liked Adam Naiman's books on the filmography of the Coen brothers and on the filmography of Paul Thomas Anderson. Good stuff. From Mr. Thurman, thank you so much for writing in and for your support of the show. If you, like Mr. Thurman, would like to be a family member and support us here on Filmspotting, you can visit filmspottingfamily.com and get all the details and all the benefits of being a Filmspotting family member, including our monthly bonus shows like the recent conversation about Burn After Reading. We just dropped into their family feeds, Josh. We have upcoming here in August a bit of blind spotting. 3 candidates that family members are voting on right now. It's either going to be Gaslight, Stray Dog, or Rocky Horror Picture Show. And no, we didn't just pick those all randomly. There are reasons behind all 3 of those choices. And then in September, we've got trivia spotting. So always something fun going on with the Filmspotting family. Again, filmspottingfamily.com.
Poor Adam, all alone in the theater, watching together. I mean, usually, I don't know how you feel, Adam. Usually that's my preferred mode of seeing a movie in the theater. But when it comes to horror films like together, comedies, I would say you generally want an audience. So hopefully you'll have that for the next horror film we're going to review, Weapons. I am eager to see that myself. Listeners, if you are up for either of those, Together or Weapons, or any of the new releases coming your way, you might be able to see them for free with Regal Unlimited. Regal Unlimited is the all-you-can-watch movie subscription pass that pays for itself in just 2 visits. Right now, Regal is offering Filmspotting listeners endless movies for less. If you sign up for Regal Unlimited using code FILMSPOT25, you'll get 10% off a 3-month subscription. Regal Unlimited is the only truly limitless movie subscription pass. You can see any standard 2D movie anytime. There are no blackout dates or restrictions. And with Regal Unlimited, you won't just save money on tickets, you'll also save on snacks. Members get 10% off all non-alcoholic concessions. So sign up now in the Regal app or at the link in the description and use code FilmSpot25 to receive your discount.
USAA knows dynamic duos can save the day, like superheroes and sidekicks, or auto and home insurance. With USAA, you can bundle your auto and home and save up to 10%. Visit USAA.com/bundle.
Bundle savings are off total premium, not available in all states or in all situations. To qualify, auto policy must be active prior to property policy issue, subject to change. Restrictions apply. Membership eligibility and product restrictions apply and are subject to change. USAA means United Services Automobile Association and its affiliates, San Antonio, Texas.
He was the pioneer of the glam rock movement.
He deserved universal acclaim.
He was the biggest selling poet in Britain, and he loved that.
It's time for Adam's documentary corner. I don't know. Should we call it Adam's alcove? You like that better?
Documentary alcove. Yeah, that sounds more pretentious.
Exactly. You got to have that pipe and the cardigan when you're sitting in there.
Uh-huh.
That clip was Ringo's Star. It comes from the new music doc, AngelHeaded Hipster, the songs of Marc Bolan and T-Rex. And if that name in that band, if you're drawing a blank there, I've got 3 words for you. Bang a gong. And no, I'm not going to sing to help you out any further. Adam, this documentary, which is currently playing in very limited release and is scheduled for a September VOD release, it's both a profile of Bolan, who's credited with launching the glam rock movement and who died at 29 in 1977, and it's a document of a Bolan tribute album that was released back in 2020. Artists as diverse as U2, Kesha, Father John Misty, and Nick Cave appear. Were you a Bolan fan before this, Adam? And if not, did the documentary make you one?
That fandom or lack of fandom is really what drove my interest in seeing AngelHeaded Hipster, in addition to the fact that I'm just a sucker for documentaries about artists and especially documentaries about musicians. If I want to appear credible as a music fan and musician, Josh, I can always point to the fact that the first albums I ever listened to and loved, the first needle drop I ever had on my first stereo as a young kid with a record player and a cassette deck and speakers in my bedroom, were my parents' copies of the Beatles, Rubber Soul, and the White Album. Unquestionably 2 of the greatest albums ever. Of course, I didn't really get that as that young kid. I just thought the songs were really catchy, which of course they were. But it is also true that it would be a good 8 to 10 years after that before I would realize that Paul McCartney should be my bass playing idol and not Nikki Sixx of Motley Crue. But so be it. Nikki Sixx of Motley Crue was my first music
Explains a lot.
And in interviews, it might. In interviews, whenever he'd get asked, because I read all those heavy metal magazines when I was in junior high.
What were those called again?
Metal Edge, Hit
okay.
Parade, Circus.
Circus, that's the one I was thinking of.
Whenever he'd get asked about his biggest influences, Marc Bolan and T-Rex would immediately come up. And it was true for all those hair metal rockers. Of course it was. They weren't really imitating Bowie. Nobody could really sound or look like David Bowie, but with the poofed up hair and the makeup and the crunchy guitars, they were all kind of doing Marc Bolan. Despite that, I never dug deeper. I knew Bang a Gong, and that was about it. Maybe Sam can help me out here a little bit and give us a little sound underneath. The song 20th Century Boy. I'm not sure I even knew the name of it. I just know the riff. We all know the riff. It's been used in a ton of movies. I think it's one of the greatest rock riffs of all time. And yet, as I said, I'm not sure I knew the name of the song. And if you asked me, I probably would have needed 5 to 10 guesses to tell you it was Marc Bolan. Somehow he's just been off my radar, despite knowing the great influence he had on a lot of my idols as a kid. So this was my chance to atone for my adolescent ignorance. It's a very straightforward documentary. Bolan's prolificness and eclectic spirit beg for a documentary, as daring as his look and sound, but while the film plays it safe, it reminds us why the rocker poet's influence still reverberates. That's what I learned. I didn't know he was as prolific as he was. I didn't know he was the poet that he was. I wasn't even fully aware of the eclectic spirit. Josh, all of those things are things I didn't learn ultimately from the documentary. I kind of thought he was this flash in the pan and this light that was snuffed out too soon, like a lot of rockers are. And I didn't know why so many musicians revered him the way that they did. It's archival footage, it's talking heads mixed with footage of the making of an album where they have artists performing and recording some of his songs. And that element isn't very revealing. U2, for example, does a cover of Bang a Gong. And unfortunately, there's nothing very interesting or personal about what The Edge has to say about Bang a Gong or what they bring to the version of the tune that they do. And I'd say that's true for most of the musical renditions we get in the movie. But then you also get one like the song Nick Cave performs. And it's really kind of wondrous. I am glad I saw it. And I'm glad Bolan's getting the exposure he deserves. And I will say we're dropping this show in people's podcast feeds on Friday, August 8th. If you are in New York, because this is getting a limited release here just in New York and LA. It actually came out in the UK a few years back. So some of our listeners, Josh, may have already seen this back in 2022 or 23, but it's just getting released here now. And again, that VOD release on September 5th. But the Roxy Cinema in New York tonight, Friday, 7:15, the director Ethan Silverman is going to be doing a Q&A with John Cameron Mitchell of Hedwig and the Angry Inch fame. And Mitchell has a performance. He has a song on the album in the movie as well. That's certainly something I would want to participate in or go see if I was in New York. So I wanted to make sure I mentioned that with that film coming out now, New York, LA, and rolling out to a few other cities over the next week or two.
Next week on the show, Adam, it looks like we're doing more horror. Are you up for this? Weapons. It's from Barbarian. Okay, good. It's from Barbarian director Zach Kreger. Referenced that film in our discussion of Together. Basic idea here. Talk about just one premise that's going to hook you. Kids mysteriously flee their houses late at night and don't return. Pretty good cast too, including Julia Garner and Josh Brolin. So we'll have a review of Weapons. Also, you're back on the music doc Beat.
My Beat,
it's
yes.
Never Over. Jeff Buckley is opening in limited releases this weekend. You are going to check it out and report back on that.
Now, that is an artist I can say I'm truly a fan of. So that will be a little bit of a different viewing experience.
All right. Next week for that, as well as some Massacre Theater and maybe a horror-themed top 5 from the archives to pair with Weapons. We're still thinking about that. For a current show schedule, just go to filmspotting.net/episodes.
Are you ready, Josh?
For Cinema Interruptus?
Are you ready for this?
I am.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, I am. I'm not doing any more viewing research. All my notes are in order. No, I'm not going to watch The Player for the 4th or 5th time in the last 3 months. I will when Interruptus begins on August 11. That's our first day when we watch The Player in its entirety at Chicago's Gene Siskel Film Center. And then we're going to get back together 3 days in a row after that through the 14th to go through the film a scene at a time. Anyone can participate with a comment or a question. So yeah, it's last call to get your tickets. You can purchase a 4-day package if you want to do the whole thing, or if you can only make it for one of the days, just pop in. Single day tickets will be available. Again, Cinema Interruptus, The Player at the Siskel Film Center, August 11 to 14. SiskelFilmCenter.org/Interruptus is where you can get your tickets.
Well, it's time to say goodbye, Betty. It's been so nice traveling with you.
Thank you, Irene. I was so excited, nervous. It's sure great to have you to talk to.
Remember, I'll be watching for you on the big screen.
Okay, Irene. Won't that be the day?
Time for some Deeply Flawed Filmspotting Poll results. Wait, Sam wrote that. Does that mean he's calling our listeners deeply flawed?
I mean,
they're voting.
It gets dicey between Sam and the listeners on some of these polls. They hold him to such high standards. Sometimes he's got to push back a little bit, you know?
I don't think there's anything flawed about these results. Naomi Watts there in Mulholland Drive. A couple of weeks ago, Josh, you and guest host Michael Phillips asked listeners to choose one and only one actress playing an actress going through it. That was inspired by Norma Desmond and this week's revisit of Sunset Boulevard. The options we gave you, and we gave you many great ones. Bette Davis, All About Eve. Jenna Rollins, Opening Night. Gloria Swanson, Sunset Boulevard. Juliette Binoche, The Clouds of Sils Maria. Laura Dern, Inland Empire. Naomi Watts, Mulholland Drive. Natalie Portman, May December. Scarlett Johansson, Asteroid City. Or, despite all of those options, you could write in other. How did it come out?
Well, Adam, you were worried about Juliette Binoche's chances, and indeed, she came in behind other in last place. 1% for her, 2% for other, 3% for Scarlett Johansson, 4% for Laura Dern, 6% for Natalie Portman, and 9% for Jenna Rollins, all packed together at the bottom. And it was a bit of a fight, a closer fight here at the top for the top 3. With 21% of the vote, it's Gloria Swanson in Sunset Boulevard. 24% of the vote went to Bette Davis for All About Eve, which means Naomi Watts won the poll with 30% of the vote.
Here's Jeremy Webna-Berman. The first person I thought of when I saw this prompt was Naomi Watts. Her scene where she auditions for the film, combined with her jokingly doing the bad reading, is some of the best and most riveting acting I've ever seen.
Here's Will, A Murderer's Row, with representation from 2 movies that might be in my all-time top 10, Sunset Boulevard and Mulholland. And still, it's Bette Davis without a second thought.
Dave Allen says, a lot of good options, but I literally just watched Whatever Happened to Baby Jane last night, so that's all I can think about. Bette Davis is so haunting and terrifying as Baby Jane Hudson in this, but still somehow evokes empathy for her fragile mental state. It's scary and confusing, and I loved it. Josh, quick question. Is Whatever Happened to Baby Jane possibly a blind spot for you?
Oh, no. I've seen it, I think, 2 times. It's wild. A lot of fun and a little disturbing as well. So, yeah, happy to revisit if we ever want to do a blind cow of that one. Another comment from Daniel here, who's backing up my choice. Daniel says, I have an accusation. Jenna Rollins isn't getting more votes because many have not seen Opening Night, and it is the only thing I can think of to justify her being so low. Granted, she's behind some legendary performances, and she's far from last, but I guess I just don't care. I'm deciding to be outraged just for the heck of it. Go watch Opening Night if you haven't.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to argue with the last part. Go watch it if you haven't. Great film. Kristen says, I'm going with Natalie Portman, but from her performance in Black Swan. Ooh, her spiral into the darkness after getting the role of the Black Swan is mesmerizing, definitely worthy of her Oscar win. So maybe going more performer than actress, but that could also be semantics.
Sure, I'd accept it. Here's Nick with an other vote. Nobody was going through as much as Heather Langenkamp playing herself in Wes Craven's New Nightmare. Okay, nice, Nick.
RMP writes, honestly, I can't even say if Jules Dassin's 1978 film, A Dream of Passion, is even a good movie, having seen it exactly once in 1982. But, and this does sound really intriguing, speaking of blind spots, Josh, the movie has stayed with me to this day. Melina Mercouri is a malaise-ridden actress trying to find something to interest her in playing Medea on stage. She meets with Ellen Burstyn's Brenda, the American wife of a cheating Greek husband, imprisoned in Greece for murdering her children and christened the modern Medea by the Greek press. For an actress going through it, getting in touch with your inner Medea is about as primal as it gets.
Whoa. Okay. How about our last comment here is another Burstyn performance. One listeners are maybe a little bit more familiar with. It comes from Aaron. He went other Ellen Burstyn in The Exorcist.
I'd say that counts as going through it.
A little bit.
Definitely an actress. Time for a new poll. 2025 is the 50th anniversary of one of the great movie years, 1975. A greatness that's pretty easy to measure with a look at the films nominated for the 1976 Best Picture Oscar. We have, Josh, Kubrick's Barry Lyndon. We have Sidney Lumet's Dog Day Afternoon. Jaws from Steven Spielberg. The eventual winner, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and Robert Altman's Nashville. So we gave Jaws the Sacred Cow treatment back in 2020 for its 45th. We just talked about Cuckoo's Nest last week. Both loved that film. We're going to be talking about Dog Day in a couple of weeks. Those three films are in the Filmspotting pantheon. Safe to say we're fans of those three films. And then you throw in Barry Lyndon and Nashville. Pretty formidable roster of films. What we're doing is we're throwing out Jaws. We're saying we just think Jaws would annihilate the other four as good as they are in this poll, especially knowing what we think we know about our listeners. So without Jaws, which one is the best film? Do you have a clear pick here, Josh?
I mean, it's tough because Barry Lyndon I watched for the first time just a few years ago. It's fairly fresh. Cuckoo's Nest obviously is fresh. Dog Day in Nashville, it's been a while. And sometimes the archives I have at my Larson on Film website are helpful in this case, but I looked at all four of these titles. They're all 3.5 out of 4-star movies for me, and probably ones I've mostly seen only once. Oof. So it's really tough. I mean, do I just go with recency bias and say Cuckoo's Nest right now? And maybe I'll regret that when we do Dog Day, our review coming up here. But yeah, I guess I lean that way.
I'm still reeling from the thought of Dog Day and Cuckoo's Nest only getting 3.5.
I knew you were gonna take this to Letterboxd where they have like a star commissioner. File a grievance.
Actually, that's a position I want to apply for.
I bet.
Star commissioner sounds great.
I bet.
What benefits come with that, Josh?
I mean, just the pleasure of annoying people by dissecting their star ratings. I think that should be enough.
I think I would rank them in the exact order they appear on my screen at the moment. Dog Day Afternoon, Cuckoo's Nest, Barry Lyndon, Nashville. Nashville could very easily move up ahead of Barry Lyndon if I gave the film a rewatch. I've only seen it once, and it was many years ago, 20 years ago. I think I watched it back in the early days of this show for the first time. And I do have some recency bias with Cuckoo's Nest, so it's very tough to choose between those two films. But I know I love Dog Day Afternoon. So after we talk about that, I'll feel like I've given them both the treatment they deserve, Josh, and this poll will have already been closed down and it will all be for nothing. But right now I'm going to go Dog Day, just slightly ahead of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
To satisfy the star commissioner, let me file something. I did give Cuckoo's Nest, and here maybe this supports the vote I just made, 4.5 out of 5 recently after our rewatch. So it is now bumped a little bit ahead of those others. And now you're going to say, why isn't it 5 out of 5? You know, the star commissioner doesn't work overtime. You're done. Yeah. Your business is done.
I was going to move on, actually. I can tolerate a 4.5 out of 5, Josh. You can vote in that poll and leave a comment at filmspotting.net. We will share your results and your feedback in a couple of weeks.
Hey, it's Paris. You know I love sparkly things, right? Like stars. Duh. And thanks to Hilton and AutoCamp, I just slept under them. Picture me serving looks by the fire outside my luxurious Airstream, making s'mores with the kids, while a national park is our backdrop. The great outdoors meets Hilton hospitality. That's hot. Explore all the new ways to stay at Hilton.com. Hilton for the stay.
So they were turning after all. Those cameras. Life, which can be strangely merciful, had taken pity on Norma Desmond. The dream she had clung to so desperately had enfolded her.
Sunset Boulevard is ready for its close-up, but are we? Billy Wilder's Hollywood noir came to theaters 75 years ago this month, August 1950, and it went on to become the director's most Oscar-nominated film. 11 nominations, including Best Picture, so most nominated, but also appropriate for a tale about Tinseltown disappointment, the Wilder movie with the most Oscar losses. It won only 3 of those 11 for score, art direction, and for Wilder's screenplay, which he wrote with Charles Brackett and D.M. Marshman Jr. You may be wondering, okay, what picture could have possibly beat out Sunset Boulevard? Well, makes sense that it was another showbiz-related tale. The 1951 Best Picture winner was All About Eve.
You maybe shouldn't feel too sorry for Wilder, though, after the relative disappointments of 2 films released in 1948, The Emperor Waltz and Foreign Affair. He did, before that, win Best Director, Best Picture, and Best Screenplay, plus Best Actor, maybe 1 or 2 others for The Lost Weekend in 1945. So, pretty well respected in Hollywood by the time Sunset Boulevard rolls around. As far as the plot goes, should we start at the beginning, Josh, or at the end like Wilder does? With William Holden's down on his luck screenwriter, Joe Gillis dead in a swimming pool. We then flash back 6 months earlier with Gillis fleeing Repo Men when he turns into the driveway of a Sunset Boulevard mansion. That's where he meets Gloria Swanson's Norma Desmond, a reclusive silent movie star who is eager to boot Gillis from her home until she learns his occupation, which conjures up dreams of a career comeback and maybe of romance too. Here's a clip.
She'd sit very close to me, and she'd smell of tube roses, which is not my favorite perfume, not by a long shot. Sometimes as we watched, she'd clutch my arm or my hand, forgetting she was my employer, just becoming a fan, excited about that actress up there on the screen. I guess I don't have to tell you who the star was. They were always her pictures. That's all she wanted to see.
Still wonderful, isn't it? And no dialogue. We didn't need dialogue. We had faces. There just aren't any faces like that anymore. Maybe one, Garbo. Those idiot producers. Those imbeciles. Haven't they got any eyes? Have they forgotten what a star looks like? I'll show them. I'll be up there again, so help me.
So, Josh, I do think this is yet another example of those beautiful bits of coincidence spotting that we get sometimes, totally random, where we review a new movie together about codependency the same week we discuss Sunset
Boulevard.
Kidding. On this viewing, what did you discover, if anything? Any revelations?
I mean, codependency, I think it's probably what I realized the first time. This is no blazingly new reservation, but Sunset Boulevard takes a perversely codependent relationship and blows it up to Hollywood proportions. And by that, I mean, we've already described it in a couple ways. A classic noir, a Hollywood noir. It is that. It's beautifully that. And we should talk about the ways it's a noir. It's also a backstage studio drama, which is something entirely different. And it's brilliantly that. And maybe the observation I had watching this more towards the beginning, but this is equally a Tinseltown Gothic horror. And I'm watching this movie, Adam, and maybe it's just because, we got Robert Eggers' Nosferatu a few months ago now. And I'm looking at Norma Desmond sitting like Dracula in this high-backed chair in the midst of this dark, cavernous room. It doesn't really click for me there. But then I notice as she's interviewing Gillis, their first meeting at her desk, and she's trying to hire him, basically, and her one knee is up on her chair. She's clutching her knee.
This is so funny. I'm going to start with this same scene, but maybe go in a different direction.
Okay. To me, it's a Nosferatu-style claw. And then you've got her servant, her servant, Max, played by the director, Eric von Stroheim, closing the drapes so that all sunlight is being shut out. And we have her entombing her guest, proposing a deal that's going to end with her living on at the cost of his life. And I think there are other great little touches. There are the rats in her pool. There is the coffin for her chimp. You've got a coffin even. As the movie went on, it seemed to drop. Who knows how much any of this was intentional. It did seem to drop some of the Dracula stuff. Gillis does call her a sleepwalker at one point. Yes. And then there is that great Bride of Frankenstein shot of her when she stands up in her private screening room. She's backlit by the projector, and she's going off. And I'm thinking, oh, this is Bride of Frankenstein. So anyway, the larger point I want to make is not that Sunset Boulevard is a Dracula movie, but that it is also this Gothic horror in so many ways. The filmmaking leans into this, but it's also these other things. That's the brilliance of it, is that it can explore all of these genres fairly equally and equally well.
Yeah. Part of the brilliance of Wilder is that he made films within almost every type of genre. And some would argue he made perhaps the best film in all of those genres, or some of those genres. And here you've got a film that is kind of not any one genre, and it wraps up a bunch of different ones very well. And as I said, it's so funny because we cued into one scene in particular, but are going to perhaps use it for different reasons, even though I'm not going to take issue at all with your reading, including even the mention of her as a sleepwalker. That Gothic element is undoubtedly here. But for me, the thing that stood out to me this time, or at least what I as a viewer tapped into that I never had before. And Josh, maybe it was just about me opening myself up to this possibility. It doesn't even have to be so much about Wilder's filmmaking. It's just about me allowing myself to have this experience. I really tapped in for the first time to Norma's humanity. It's been 15 years since I've seen this film, I believe. It was part of a Wilder marathon back in 2010 that corresponded with a Graham School class that Maddie and I were teaching at the University of Chicago about Wilder. And part of it, as well as maybe just appreciating Swanson's performance even more than
I want to talk about that.
Did. It's so easy to see her, again, rightfully, the way you're describing her, and to see her as this relic, not just figuratively, but literally as a sort of object, and see her as inhuman. That's consistent with being a vampire, right? The fact that she's always in character, she's in costume, it seems. It seems like she's always performing. That description of her as a sleepwalker. Well, a sleepwalker, in addition to conjuring the idea of a vampire, it just makes you think of a spirit. And she's not even Norma Desmond, really. In that same bit where Joe talks about her as a sleepwalker, he calls her the great Norma Desmond. The subject that makes her crazy, her celluloid self, the great Norma Desmond. So she's not a person. She's a thing. And when he starts reading her lousy screenplay, he says, as for her, she sat coiled up like a watch spring, her cigarette clamped in a curious holder. And if you notice even there, the way he's describing her, the way Wilder and his co-screenwriters are describing her, they're dehumanizing her. They're describing her coiled up like a watch, like an object. But I had never paid attention, even though the narration is calling attention to it. I had never really paid attention to how she is sitting and how odd that is for a character of her stature and status to be sitting like that. And I almost felt like, Josh, going really the complete opposite direction of a vampire or any other creature, I saw her sitting there almost like a little girl. The way a little girl would sit in a chair with her legs up in the chair, with her knees up by her neck. And so she's still on some level performing the role of Norma Desmond, but she's also betraying the fact that a handsome man is in front of her and she's hoping to impress him because he's good looking, but also because it's her script and she wants to impress him with that script. And so the body just kind of does that and betrays that fact. So that is something that I tapped into this time. And I think, throughout, Josh, we can geek out, and we will, about probably some lines and some shots, but just to really put a bow on this thought about her humanity, my God, that staircase descent.
What a shot. And the way she carries the moment too.
The way she carries it, the staging so that the police and the cameramen and the reporters all basically freeze.
Yes.
So it's like one of her oil canvases of a legendary figure or a mythical figure come to life. It's Norma, though, being Norma. It's Norma being a star. So what does that mean? She transcends space and time. She gets to glide down the stairs past the glued onlookers. And that line, her line at the end, it's one of those classic Mandela effect moments, right? Don't we all think that she says, "I'm ready for my close-up, Mr. DeMille," but she actually says, "Mr. DeMille,
yeah,
I'm ready for my close-up."
And she underplays it. She undersells it.
She does. You're so right. But that line, because of the way it's been used, overused in popular culture, that is another factor, I think, in distancing us from Norma as a person. And seeing her as this capital T tragic figure, but we don't really see her as a person, as a tragic figure. And so just watching it this time, for the first time for me, as mad as she clearly is, I didn't gawk at her as she walked down those stairs. And I didn't think about her in a sensationalistic way and her tragic fall. I actually really felt sadness. I felt sadness for Norma in those final moments in a way, as I said, I haven't before. Even if, did you notice, Wilder denies her the close-up. He blurs the camera lens before she fully moves into the close-up. And you could read that on some level like a coldness or maybe a meanness to Norma. I do know that in my research back when I taught this as part of that class, that Brackett thought throughout the film that not even so much Norma, the character, but to Gloria Swanson, Wilder was often too mean with how he staged some of those shots, the harshness of the lighting, all the mirrors, the close-ups, that they were too garish, that they emphasized her oldness and they were maybe too mean. But I'll just say at the end, it goes back to something I talked about during the apartment, Josh. It's more about just kind of Wilder's clear-eyed matter-of-factness about the world. And it actually kind of, for me, just further amplifies the tragic nature of the fact that even in that last moment, she doesn't get it. Not only does she not get her film, she doesn't even get that close-up she's asking for there.
Yeah, I think I would put it in the category, completely agree with you about her humanity being at the fore. And I'll talk a little bit about how I think the performance is key to that, but I think it's key in the direction and the filmmaking too. So for me, that final shot, the lack of a extreme close-up that we might be expecting, that's maybe in our memories because of how the line is quoted, choosing to go otherwise, to me, is a bit of deference to her and a distinction from what we do get earlier in the film, where she does look scary or monstrous, rather than using a similar shot and expecting Swanson to do all the work of making that distinction. The filmmaking here is helping her. And then she's doing the work, as I said, by underplaying the line. In my memory, it's shouted, it's declared, it's this, this camp moment. And it is not. As a matter of fact, it stands out. It's one of the only lines that she speaks softly where she isn't performing for anyone. And I think it's because she has found her space. Now, it's a false space, but she's found the place she's been seeking to be on set in her mind, doing good work. And so she can be relaxed and she can be herself. And that's why she just says the line quietly. Another touch in terms of the filmmaking, the crane, which is probably what was used as she comes down the stairway, I think it's crucial that the crane follows her because we're with her. This again is putting us aligned with her, not gawking at her. It's not making her look ridiculous. It's making her look regal and noble. Is there some irony there? Of course. And maybe Wilder means it to be sarcastic. But for me, on this viewing, it felt almost honoring, actually, how that final sequence played out.
I can't go on with the scene. I'm too happy. Mr. DeMille, do you mind if I say a few words? Thank you.
So it is interesting that you picked that early interrogation scene and as the jumping off point for her humanity. For me, it came in another sequence that I feel is so crucial. This is after Norma has pushed her way onto the Paramount Pictures lot, and she's forced this meeting with Cecil B. DeMille, her former director, DeMille playing himself, of course, while he's on his set. And not only in this sequence, Adam, is DeMille so gentle with her, not trying to squash her deluded dreams, but finding a way to, yes, move her along, but without making her feel foolish. But how about the choice Wilder and working with cinematographer John F. Seitz here? They anoint her in this angelic air by having this veteran spotlight operator recognize Norma and on the set. And so he turns the beam onto her as she sits in a chair, and she exults in it. Again, this could be a gawking moment. There are gawking moments of Norma in this movie, but to me, this is more about her regalness, her nobility, her history, her place in Hollywood history. This attracts the attention of the crew. They're delighted by the surprise appearance of this legend. And then we get, after their effusive praise, she weeps in gratitude. And there's something I find deeply touching and genuine about that moment, and not sarcastic or even ironic or biting at all. So I think that's in the filmmaking, the humanity. But maybe another revelation I had, Adam, is in Gloria Swanson's performance. Again, don't know how long ago it was that I saw this. Certainly had not seen enough movies or thought deeply enough about performance. This is something I feel like sometimes I'm still trying to get better at. What makes a good performance in different tones and ranges and styles? And we certainly have one of cinema's grand melodramatic performances here from Swanson. But I think it works beyond just being entertaining in a gawking way. And what helped me is having seen, between my first viewing of Sunset Boulevard and now, a lot of the work of Bette Davis and Joan Crawford. Now, Swanson, I had to remind myself, had already been nominated for 2 Oscars before she was nominated for this. In her heyday, she had made silent pictures. She had produced silent pictures. So her heyday was before Crawford and Davis were in their professional prime. So for them, it was like late 30s into the 40s. So you have to think Swanson's early work had to influence them, especially the deliciously vicious women. I think of them as playing, right? And without a doubt, her Norma Desmond is in that cauldron of whatever happened to Baby Jane, which has Davis and Crawford, right? And so Swanson is largely remembered for Sunset Boulevard, despite that earlier career. But it's hard to imagine the careers of 2 other Hollywood legends without the totality of her contributions to Hollywood, all of which informs the pathos she brings to Norma Desmond. So you have someone here who is rooting these outsized gestures and these grandiose expressions, which she gives. She's rooting them in real character, because Norma Desmond feels like every day she's performing in a silent movie.
Exactly.
And what do you do in a silent movie?
Her house is a set.
Her house is a set. I understand not all silent movies did actors perform this way, but there was a certain strain of silent cinema where, yes, your gestures were broad, your expressions were exaggerated. And that is the kind that Norma Desmond, we understand, had made. She's still making them, to your point, in her home. And so this is where the melancholy madness, for me, is really rooted in this, yes, melodramatic, but also effective method, where we see her as a person, as a human, deluded, but once regal, once noble, and perhaps deserving to still have more of a shred of that than she actually still has.
Hey, Miss Desmond! Miss Desmond! It's me! It's Hawkeye!
Hello, Hawkeye.
Let's get a good look at you.
I want to touch on a few things that you mentioned there. Reportedly, at the movie's premiere, Barbara Stanwyck speaking to Swanson, not only the performance that she gives here, but her standing, Barbara Stanwyck bowed down at her feet at the premiere and literally kissed her garments.
There's another legend.
But when you mention the end and the way she underplays the line about her close-up, it occurs to me that whether intentional or not on Wilder and Swanson's part, it's another little bit of tragic irony, perhaps, that she can't exist as an actress in this modern age of talkies, that she doesn't belong in this space, or they won't allow her in because she seems to belong to this bygone era where they overacted. And as she says, they didn't need words, right? They had faces. But in that moment, just like a great talky screen actress, she's effectively able to modulate her performance and speak the lines to the camera exactly the way she needs to. So that occurs to me as you were saying that. And I also think about the heavy lifting that is done as we're touching on this point and the bygone era of her former performances. How much heavy lifting is done by the scene where we watch Joe and Norma watch her old movie? He, in his narration, is disparaging it. He views the whole thing as pathetic and pitiful, but Wilder's camera lingers on that movie screen. And what do we see on the screen? There's nothing pathetic or pitiful about it. We see an astonishing face. And I think it reinforces for me, Josh, that what she's hanging on to and what she's trying to recapture so badly, it's not even so much her youth. I was trying to think of the words, something greater than youth. Is it a life force? Is it a certain vitality that she's emanating? And then I realized that, of course, the word is stardom. It's whatever makes up the essence of a star. It's there in that shot that we're watching on the screen that she has. And you watch it and then you somehow understand, well, of course she doesn't want to lose that. That's something she's not going to want to give up.
And what do you need for stardom? You need an audience. And that's what she's lost.
You talked about that amazing shot where the light shines down on her, the spotlight, and she basks in it. And I do think that's so important. I'm really glad you said it, only because I had a line in my notes that, this happens. Sometimes you write something and then you look at it later and you go, oh, I'm not entirely sure what I was referring to.
Sure, yeah.
My line was, tough that the indignity of DeMille's denial follows her return. And I had return in single quotes. Well, see, I need to take better notes that are less oblique or whatever. Her return that I'm referring to is that return. The return that she gets is that moment where the light is on her and the crowd adores her. And to your point, it is genuine. In that light, in that moment, the audience, that isn't just for show. They aren't pitying her. Those people genuinely do know who she is, and they come up to her and they show their gratitude to her, and she's grateful for it. So we know that in the grand scheme of things, she's not the star she once was, that she's a has-been, that Max has to write the notes. We know all of that's true, but two things can be true at once, that in that moment, she gets the reverence that she probably deserves. And so the indignity part is that soon after this, of course, DeMille is going to deny her. She's not going to get to make this movie. And that's already hard enough for Norma to accept, considering what she believes about herself. But imagine how much harder it is after she's actually felt the basking in the glow of the light again.
Yeah.
And it's real.
Yeah. And then that's maybe why she falls as far as she does, mentally, at least, is getting a taste of it, and then not having the rest is, makes it even worse. So we've talked about, a number of shots here. And I do think, now I haven't seen all of Billy Wilder's films, but this has to be one of the more visually ambitious of those that I have seen. We spent some time in our discussion of The Apartment about how that is visually ambitious, but I think this is an area Wilder is sometimes not given enough credit for. And man, are there so many aesthetic flourishes here. I want to talk about a few that aren't related necessarily to Norma Desmond, but just the fact that this movie opens with that unbroken reverse tracking shot moving down a road and then lifts up to reveal these squad cars racing toward her house.
Yeah. Isn't this the American Beauty shot, essentially, with the narration?
Right.
Didn't it kind of ape
Yeah, it is. It is definitely echoed there. That's not something, that comes to mind that a Billy Wilder movie would open with. And of course, you reference the shot of Gillis face down in the pool. But there are levels of artistry to that shot because the camera at the bottom of the pool looking up, we see his face, and then behind through the water, we see the police sergeants or investigators standing at the pool's edge. It's incredibly unnerving. And another great use of a crane as Gillis is walking up the steps to her outdoor terrace, the dilapidated terrace. And then we see her through this slow zoom. We see Norma behind some blinds, creepily watching him. I mean, these are all kind of crime and horror techniques that are blended to create something that's very eerie, very unnerving, goes back to the noir idea, goes back to the Gothic idea. But it also has this faded glamour of old Hollywood to it. So the filmmaking here is top tier level for Wilder, for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, I have a section here on just the filmmaking, but then I have a separate section that's just elements I love. And they're all part of the filmmaking. They're Wilder touches, if you will, that I think really reflect his brilliance and his cleverness as a writer and a director, but they kind of go above some of the more common things that you may notice in the film. For me, those elements I love are things like Joe Gillis is a screenwriter, and yet he's absolutely horrendous at picking up on foreshadowing. The fact that he shows up, and even though it's misdirection or it's a mistake, they think he's someone else. The fact that they have been expecting him, right, suggests that there's almost something faded about his appearing. The fact that he does show up and there's this dead monkey, which the insanity of that. We grew up in a time, right? Remember we grew up in that time with Michael Jackson at his Neverland Ranch and knew about like monkeys and stuff. And
Bubbles, was it Bubbles? Does that sound
so.
right?
But like that to us, even that was in the 80s. And we thought about what that was like to have animals around your house and what that said about, I don't know, your state of mind. Well, this is the 1950s and here she is with her pet monkey. But the fact that monkey is carried out in a coffin, and it suggests, this pet monkey is the role he probably is going to fill. And the fact that Max says, I made your bed this afternoon before he's agreed to spend the night.
Yeah.
And I even love just the fact that he refers to himself as a ghostwriter. Ghostwriter in this case takes on a little bit of extra meaning. I think, especially as from the beginning of the film, we know that he's dead. And then when his car gets taken away, that's another moment where the car is almost like the monkey's coffin. That's when he's officially being left behind. It's like, okay, Joe isn't going anywhere. But the other little Wilder touches, Josh, are things like when he goes to leave at one point in a huff. And I think it might be that first one on New Year's Eve when he gets mad at her and goes, his pocket watch that
I love this touch.
She gives to him, gets stuck on the door. It's only Wilder would think of this, right? It's almost like Norma's hand is somehow there to just snatch him back for a second before he goes. Yeah. But it's the pocket watch.
Notice that.
Right.
Can I give you another one just like that? When she's on DeMille's set, sitting in the chair. How about when the boom mic
That's my next
floats
one.
over her head and hits the feather on her hat, and she kind of
like a fly. It's like a fly.
She looks up at it and annoys her. The sound era forced her out of business, and now here's this mic hitting her classy costume.
The moment she sits down, the annoying fly, the microphone starts buzzing around her. It's beautiful. And then even from a little editing standpoint, there is the moment where he says, just whenever she noticed that I was getting bored, that she would go back to her favorite bit. And it was like the Max Sennett Bathing Beauties. Yeah. And when he cuts on that, it's on her umbrella twirling, and it feels just like one of those kaleidoscopic cuts that you got in a lot of those old-timey movies. And then one other one I want to give you is near the end with Betty. The meta element here, the screenwriting element, that he is a screenwriter, the fact that it's all rooted in Hollywood and Hollywood lore. the way he finally comes clean with Betty. He tells her everything. They're writers together, and he's giving her the backstory. He's filling her in on everything. And what does she say? The way she phrases it is really interesting. She says, no, I haven't heard any of this. I never got those telephone calls. I've never been in this house. Get your things together. Let's get out of here. So Betty, the screenwriter, is basically saying, nope, I'm taking these pages that have been written. I'm throwing them in the garbage can. I don't care what we've written before, what you've written before. We're starting with a blank page. We can now just walk right out of here and we can start a new story. And he doesn't say yes to that because it turns out we think in the moment that it's because he feels too guilty and that he's succumbing to the fate, the hand that he's been dealt. We realize actually that no, he is starting his new story. He's just starting it alone as a solo screenwriter. But I love the fact that she as a writer is saying, we can write a new story, Joe. I promise we can.
There is that meta element with Betty, the screenwriter, played by Nancy Olson, which I do think is nice and feels a bit like a Wilder touch as well. But I found on this viewing that their scenes did drag a little bit. You know, I don't know if I just didn't need as many. You've got to get out of the mansion at some point. I understand that. But the romance with Gillis, I don't know, where are we on Holden in this film? Let me ask you that, because I think I liked his presence best as a narrator, his voice and his delivery. And again, this is where a noir element comes in. I think he evokes that well. As a screen presence in his scenes with, Gloria Swanson, he works, I guess is what I'd say. But the power dynamic is not supposed to be equal, but the performance dynamic maybe should be a little more equal in some way. I did like, though, and here's another noir thing I'll throw at you. I did like Holden's Joe Gillis is essentially the femme fatale when you think about it. He shows up and he's mysterious and he's maybe useful, maybe not. You can't quite trust him. And how about the fact that he's absolutely a sexual object? That pool scene when he gets out of the pool and towels off in front of her. Yes. So I realized that, well, this is interesting about his character, that he's basically playing the femme fatale in the noir. Otherwise, I don't know, maybe just a little bit more there from Holden might have gone. If I'm nitpicking here. This is a masterpiece, but I
like Holden, and I like Holden in Wilder movies for the most part. I agree with some of the scenes with Betty, with Olsen in particular, and those moments where, for example, he's kissing her nose and we're supposed to believe that they're falling madly in love with each other. Something about that dynamic always feels a little bit off, and we need to believe that they're really falling in love with each other. I never really got it. Part of it was I just felt like, and I looked this up at one point, but now I don't have it in front of me. It felt like one of those classic Hollywood cases where there was a dramatic age difference. I don't know if there was, but it feels like it on screen.
You know what? I'm glad you brought that up. I meant to throw this out there because I was thinking about it while watching and had forgotten. But for those curious, Gloria Swanson born 1899.
Yeah.
And William Holden born 1918. So what, like 20 years, right? If my math
but Swanson was only 50 when she was making this film. Yeah. So I felt a disparity in those characters that didn't serve those scenes necessarily very well. And I'll agree with you that maybe that entire storyline feels maybe a little bit more rushed in a way that the rest of the film certainly doesn't. We need the plot mechanics of their relationship to fuel the end of the film. I still love some of those touches, like the one I mentioned, and really just the overall, the cleverness, and I'll use that word again, the irony, the way Wilder and Brackett, they've constructed this story. The last film he worked with Brackett on, where they've constructed this entire thing around this notion, as we see in the beginning, that all Joe wants to do is write something that will sell. That's all he's trying to do. And he's failing miserably. And then what happens? He stops writing and he becomes embroiled in a story that's the best, most sensational story maybe of all time. Think about how well this story is going to play, right? He's not going to reap any benefits of it, but it is going to sell like hotcakes and is probably going to get turned into a movie at some point, right?
Maybe even win a couple Oscars. Who knows?
It might even win a couple of Oscars. How about some of the lines, right? I mean, besides the fact that you've got the poor dope, he always wanted a pool, just of course. And that goes with the shot, as you mentioned. And I think they used a mirror, some kind of effect that they pulled off there that was amazing. I love the way he describes her still waving proudly to a parade that had long since passed her by. If you can write lines like that, right?
Yeah.
And another one later when he's filling Betty in, and he says, an older woman who is well-to-do, a younger man who is not doing too well, can you figure it out yourself, is pretty good. And even just what he does with the narration, the way not only do we have the aspect of a narrator who is clearly dead that's telling the entire story in flashback, but I like the fact that there's a moment, Josh, where the narrator cuts himself off at one point. It's as if, even though it's all happening in the past, it's as if it's happening in real time. He says, uh-oh.
Yeah.
He says, uh-oh, and stops himself. And that adds just another like bit of excitement to the whole proceedings.
Yeah, I do like the narration in this quite a bit. I'll end us with one more line, and it brings us back to what we started talking about at the beginning, which is Norma's, humanity, really, which we see in this film. And at one point she says, great stars have great pride. Mm-hmm. And I think that's key to the performance, because I do think that's something Swanson deeply, intimately understood and is able to bring it to the fore and make, again, Norma someone who's maybe a has-been, but her feelings about that are real and genuine. And that comes through in the film.
Yeah, it does. And I want to end with mentioning the iconography, which you talked about a little bit at the beginning, and the way the film is established in this setting. We've got Schwab's. That's part of the iconography of Hollywood, the storytelling, the classic story of the discovery of certain actresses at the drugstore, and the Hollywood pools, which of course has to be a key part of this story. Normal people who come from the Midwest out to live their dreams, and they do, right? And of course, where is he going back to? He's going back to Ohio.
Yeah.
It's always the Midwest where we come from, right? Where they come from to go out to Hollywood and live their dreams. And the beginning of the film, it's not like it is in so many Hollywood films that are about this dream, where you're seeing the Hollywood sign and you're seeing the movie premiere and the studios and all the lights and stuff, right? It is the dingiest street you've ever seen, and the abandoned tennis court covered in leaves. And it is so dirty and grimy. And the fact that the title of the film isn't Sunset Boulevard in some kind of radiant way, right? It's just the words in writing on the street. It immediately clues you in to what kind of movie this is going to be, and that it's going to have some fun with your expectations. It's going to subvert what we think of as the classic Hollywood dream kind of tale. And we get that with the fun he has as well with the waxworks, with characters like Keaton, bringing some of those classic Hollywood folks into there as well.
Keaton's one line.
That's it. And you add those elements in with the cleverness and with the economy of the filmmaking, even like we get the moment where we learn why there are no doorknobs on the doors. And then when Joe leaves and she goes upstairs, the camera just shows us the door closing and focuses on the door. And in that moment, we know exactly what's coming next. We don't need anything more. We don't need to go inside. We know exactly, just by that simple establishing of what that door knob means, and the fact that the camera shows us that as she closes it, we know what is coming next. And he's just so, as I said, economic and smart as a filmmaker. And then there are those grand touches, like we've mentioned as well.
Effective use of, the lack of doorknobs throughout with the lighting as well. When the light comes on, it'll then shine through the open holes, or when it goes out, it's extra ominous. So employs that motif quite well throughout.
The last one I just thought of is when you were talking about the fact that the whole place really is like this silent film set that she's created. At New Year's Eve, it feels that way when you've got a live orchestra playing. But how about the fact that
those poor guys
they reference in that early scene that the wind comes in and it makes the organ play. So it's like the whole place is alive.
Mm.
And you get these moments of music accompaniment to whatever is happening within the space. He doesn't overlook anything, Wilder. And actually what we haven't even touched on, I'll leave it here. We don't need to get into it, but having just talked about The Apartment, and I know The Apartment comes 10 years after this, but there is very direct overlap in the concepts of opportunism. And Wilder very directly said everybody in this movie is an opportunist. If you think about it, even Betty, who's kind of playing like the wide-eyed naive, or she seems like the very ideological. Well, no, she's in this certainly at first because she wants to get a screenplay published.
Yeah, it takes priority over art. Her fiance, you get that sense for sure. Yeah,
she wants to move up. She doesn't want to be a script reader anymore. She wants to be a screen writer. And in the end, what Joe shows us, I think, Josh, by trying to leave, is that he finally figures out what Jack Lemmon learns at the end of The Apartment. He learns how to be a mensch. He learns how to be a human being. He finally learns that it's not good for him or for her, for Norma, to continue using her. He also knows it's wrong for Betty and Artie, his friend, for him to run off with Betty. And he decides he's going to be a human being. He's just going to leave. He's not going to blame anyone else for his problems. He's not going to try to cause any more problems for anyone else. He is just going to go and he's going to live his life. But it's too late. And that's the tragedy of it. I think he learns the lesson.
Yeah, there's the added layer in this, it involves suicide, as The Apartment does, but there's the added layer of what responsibility might he bear for leaving at this point, to your point about him trying to get what he wants and being a bit of a player in all of this and a striver. He carries something of a burden, even though you feel like these aren't empty threats, but they are threats she knows she can make. There is a level of complication there that I think is interesting, which is, it's perhaps the right decision, but maybe not necessarily a noble one. I don't know.
At the same time,
a little complicated.
How can you put that burden on him? Right? He already,
because she was in this state before he arrived. As well. Yeah.
Sunset Boulevard is available VOD. If you agree or disagree with us, or have any other thoughts you would like to share about that conversation or the show, we would love to hear from you. feedback@filmspotting.net. That is our show.
You can find Adam and the show on Instagram, Facebook, or Letterboxd at Filmspotting. I'm at those places, as well as Blue Sky as Larson on Film. We are independently produced and listener supported. You can support the show by joining the Filmspotting family at filmspottingfamily.com. That way you'll be able to listen early and ad-free. You'll also get a weekly newsletter, monthly bonus episodes, and access to the entire show archive. For show t-shirts and other merch, you can go to filmspotting.net/shop.
We did just discuss The Apartment on episode 1022. Double Indemnity was on episode 889, part of the Summer of Stanwyck Marathon. And back in 2010, we did that Billy Wilder Marathon. Streaming this weekend, I wasn't that excited to see this movie, Josh, as I started initially reading the blurb here, even though I love Eddie Murphy. Eddie Murphy and Pete Davidson are armored truck drivers who get ambushed by a group of ruthless criminals. But then I saw who that group of ruthless criminals was led by, and it's Keke Palmer.
I know. I was in the same boat. The screening invite came for this, and I was like, and then, maybe I'll have to go to this. Couldn't make it work, but am intrigued, and Keke Palmer is reason enough to catch up with it at some point.
And you can do that on Amazon Prime. In limited release, the new documentary from Amy J. Berg, who made Deliver Us from Evil and Janice, Little Girl Blue. It's about the singer-songwriter immortalized by his cover of Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah, Jeff Buckley. The documentary is It's Never Over, Jeff Buckley. My Mother's Wedding is also out. Three sisters return home for the third wedding of their twice-widowed mother. It's directed by Kristen Scott Thomas and stars Scarlett Johansson and Sienna Miller. In wide release, Freakier Friday. I'm told, Josh, that it's another Freaky Friday, but just a little bit freakier.
I mean, how could it not be?
Jamie Lee Curtis and Lindsay Lohan team up again. Weapons is also out. This is the new one from Zach Krager, who did 2022's Barbarian. Every kid but one from the same class vanish on the same night at the exact same time. Julia Garner, Josh Brolin, Alden Ehrenreich, and Benedict Wong. We are going to have to get to the bottom of why every kid but one vanishes from that class on the same night at the same time, and talk about that next week. I'm definitely going to see the Jeff Buckley doc. We'll see what else comes up on next week's show.
Filmspotting is produced by Golden Joe Dassault and Sam Van Halgren. Without Sam and Golden Joe, this show wouldn't go. Our production assistant is Sophie Kempenaar. Special thanks to everyone at WBEZ Chicago. More information is available at wbez.org. For Filmspotting, I'm Josh Larson.
And I'm Adam Kempenaar. Thanks for listening.
This conversation can serve no purpose anymore. Goodbye.
Filmspotting is listener supported. Join the Filmspotting family at filmspottingfamily.com and get access to ad-free episodes, monthly bonus shows, our weekly newsletter, and for the first time, all in one place, the entire Filmspotting archive going back to 2005. That's at filmspottingfamily.com.